Welcome to the Date Forever podcast. Keep your relationship fueled up with strategies discovered by couples and experts. Because at Fuel Collective, we believe better relationships will equal a better world. You are about to discover specific insights and tools that cost little or nothing to implement to help you date forever. And now, here are your hosts, a couple who always have a half-packed suitcase and a date night in the calendar, Sammy and Nathan Yeager.
Welcome to the Date Forever podcast. In today's episode, we're talking to Wala Truscott all about intimacy. The things we're chatting about are being sexy rather than polite, who is really giving and receiving, and why it's kind to yourself and to your partner to be asking for what you really want. Now let's get into it.
Welcome to the Date Forever podcast, everyone. Today we've got Wala Truscott joining us. She is a certified somatic sex educator with 15 years of experience with human sexual behavior and alternative lifestyles. She is sassy, honest, and well-grounded. Wala has a mature outlook towards relationships and human sexuality, and with the right amount of spiritual zen and good damn pinch of cheek, which makes your time immersed with her warm, sensual deliciousness all the more fun. So welcome to the podcast, Wala.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, Wala, how did you get interested in this type of work?
I had my heart broken, so that's actually what opened the door for me to understand how love is actually given and received, because when my relationship ended, I was so deflated when he said I felt unloved, when from my perspective, I loved every hair on that man's body. So it just was such a mind-blowing experience that how could I love a man so much and yet him say that he didn't feel loved? So that put me down the rabbit hole of wanting to understand relationships and love and sex and how we all connect and what makes us feel fulfilled, and here I am.
I think that's a common thing, right? We have some sort of experience, or we watch someone close to us have an experience, and then we find this thread, and then we just keep pulling on it and pulling on it and pulling on it until it, opens the floodgates of all these new learnings. So I'm sorry to hear that you had that experience, but I'm so glad that you're here with us to teach us some of the learnings that you had along the way.
Yeah, I'm actually quite grateful for the experience, to be honest.
Yeah. So what are some of the problems that, your typical clients come to you with?
I think people do things from a place of habit and pattern, and everybody has a really good intention to give to their partner. However, what I've worked out through my own relationship and working with people is that when you ask each person in the relationship, do you prefer to give or receive? Both people usually say they prefer to give. So the learning behind that is if you have two people giving in a relationship, then who's receiving?
Yeah. It's kind of like that inhale and exhale. You need to have both.
Yes, but we're not raised to ask for what we want. We're very much raised to be polite, nice and polite, and we're raised to conform, and we're raised to not be painful and not be selfish. And there's all of these little ingrained anchor points in our life where we prefer to give. It's safer to give than it is to receive.
Yeah, so I've heard you say that you can either be polite or sexy, but not both. So can you just explain a little bit about what you mean when you say that?
Well, we're raised to be nice and polite. So it's actually a human default setting for us to be nice and polite.
Yeah.
But it can also mean you're quite boring. We've all met that person, or you've dated that person, and you're like, they're nice, but it means that there's no flavour to that person. So being polite or being the person that is always trying to be nice can often just be doing things because they don't want to cause conflict, which means they're going along with things, which is not how intimacy or foundation of a relationship is going to build strength, because you're not actually being honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. And being authentic and honest is vulnerable.
Yeah, I know that in mine and Nath's relationship, I would much rather that Nath came to the party and was like, hey, babe, I'm taking you out on Friday night and this is where we're going and be ready at this time. Then I don't know, what do you want to do? And that kind of polite, not communicating what he wants to do. I would agree that I would find the first option much sexier, even if it wasn't something that I would have chosen to do myself. I'd still have a lot more allure and interest and sexiness with it.
But it actually goes against our patterns to actually say the words I want and I need. And because if you said the words I want or I need as a child, we've all heard those sayings like the world doesn't revolve around you, stop thinking about yourself, share, think about your brothers and sisters. So the saying I want or I need was actually parented out of us.
Interesting. So what's the best alternative for those kinds of phrases? What do we move to as an adult to get it, to either relearn or reparent ourselves to ask for those things?
Okay, so what I'd ask your listeners to do is just notice when you start a sentence with do you, yet you're putting your desire forward. So if I wanted to have coffee with Nathan and Sammy, I might say, do you want to have coffee on Tuesday? But if I was to ask that sentence cleanly and clearly, the sentence should be verbalized as I want to have coffee with you on Tuesday. But I gift wrap the coffee to pretend that it's for you so that you now have to reject me if the coffee is not a right time or you can't do it. So I've actually manipulated the coffee to make it about you, but it's really about me.
That's so interesting. Do you want versus like I want.
So if you say things like, do you want coffee? Do you want to meet for coffee on Tuesday? Or do you want to go to the bakery? Or do you want Thai for dinner? You're the one that's actually verbalizing your desire.
Yeah.
So if you reframe that and said, I want coffee, I want to go to the bakery, and I want Thai for dinner, are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the person verbalizing the desire is usually the person that wants what they're asking for.
Yeah. So you can still ask it as a question, but essentially just putting your desires out there first to say, this is what I would really like to do, or this is what I would really like, and then would you like to join me in doing that?
Yeah.
So how does this translate into the bedroom? Or if people have had difficulties communicating their everyday kind of desires, if that's already a challenge, how do we then take what might be a bigger challenge in asking for what we desire, sexually or in our intimacy?
So if you can't say the words, I want Thai for dinner, it's going to be really hard to say, I want this type of flavor in bed.
Yeah.
It's an actual practice. So you need to be able to notice when you are going along with things outside of the bedroom and stopping yourself and then reframing it. Because when you learn to communicate from a place of vulnerability, then you can learn to communicate in the bedroom from a place of vulnerability. However, there's a big clause here. Quite often in the bedroom, we associate doing an action with giving a gift or giving pleasure. And that's not always true. You can be doing an action and receiving, but if you try and gift wrap that you're giving, that means two people are giving and neither one of you are receiving. And that's how a sexual connection becomes misaligned, because if you're not getting if you didn't ask for it, you probably didn't want it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
But someone's giving it to you anyway. If someone's giving you pleasure in the bedroom and you didn't necessarily ask for it in a specific way, they're probably guessing. And it's highly likely they're guessing incorrectly.
Yeah. There's so many options.
Because, well, they're doing the best they can with what they know, which is nothing. Because the other person, if they're being polite and nice or they're being easygoing, what has your partner got to work with? Now what we do is we go into our habits and patterns of moaning and groaning and going through the arching of the back and doing what we do because we don't want to upset our partner. And we want to make them feel good because we know that the intention is there. But if you didn't ask for it, you're probably giving, and the person giving thinks they're giving, which means no one's receiving.
Yeah, this is a super interesting conversation because I know I can't speak for guys, but I know that amongst my girlfriends, it's not uncommon that some of them have faked orgasms either with their current partner or with partners in the past. And when you unpack that is really about being polite, isn't it? They think that that's the kind and nice thing to do, when in reality, it's probably much nicer and kinder to be clear
And it's not really serving anyone, is it?
It's not. And the unfortunate thing is the person doing the action genuinely wants to sexually satisfy their partner.
Mm.
But if the other person does not have the skills, and it is a skill, it's not automatic. If you can't say, I want to have coffee, then how the hell are you going to say, I want you to go down on me in this particular way?
Yeah.
Or I want you to touch my body in this particular way. If you can't ask for coffee, you're going to struggle to ask for that. But it also, the person doing an action, if they require a response or reaction from the person that they're doing it to, they're kind of forcing the moans and groans because the other person doesn't want to offend.
Mm.
So you can't be a giver and have an ego at the same time. If you want to give, genuinely give, your ego needs to be left at the door, which means a response and a reaction is not required.
Yeah, it's unconditional giving, not giving to receive.
But you can only give what was asked for. If it was never asked for, you're receiving.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure.
So I've heard you say before that there is a difference between politeness and kindness. So how do we wrap some of those more direct asking with kindness without being polite?
So what people need to notice is when they're not being truthful. And we often I've found myself in situations and I'm scratching my head going, how do I get myself here? And how do I get myself out of it? And it's because we're raised to conform and be polite and easygoing. And I'm not telling people to not be polite and easygoing, but you need to notice in your body when you want to say something, but you don't. So there's a way to say no with a closed heart, and there's a way to say no with an open heart. The kindness has an open heart.
Yeah, the thing that keeps coming to mind is like when you're out for dinner at a restaurant and there's like individual portions of something on a share plate and there's one item left. And then there's clearly somebody who wants it, but they feel like they have to be polite and offer it to everybody else first, when really their intent is, I really want to eat that last thing. That's, I
want that.
That's a really clear demonstration of someone doing what they think is the right thing to do by being polite, when really that kindness would be, I'm going to eat this last dumpling or whatever the thing might be. Yeah.
Yeah. First in, best dressed.
Or just leading with your own intent rather than cloaking it in kindness cloaking it in politeness. Yeah, exactly.
And being honest about it.
Yeah, I love that. So we've heard you talk a little bit about the disease of resentment in relationships, and that it's something that you don't just wake up with resentment for your partner, but it's actually built over time. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so love and resentment work in exactly the same manner. So if you think about two cups, love is built with little and often acts that cement this love for this person that make you feel good. And then on the other side of that is little and often drops of resentment, which is when you go along to the bakery when you don't want to go to the bakery, or when you have Thai for dinner when you really don't want to have Thai for dinner, but you're being polite, you're dropping a little drop of resentment. So that's why, you don't just wake up the next day and love somebody. It takes time. And then all of a sudden you wake up and you look at this person, you're like, I love you. But this very same person will do little things that you won't address because you won't want to address the little, what you consider petty things. But that's just another drop of resentment. And then one day you wake up and you look at this person, you're like, I love you, but I can't stand you. You are so annoying, but you don't know what is annoying about that person. And it's because you don't have those awkward conversations where you're being truthful with an open heart. So this is not about arguing. And I also think that when people have a conflict, it's an opportunity to deepen your relationship. You just need to learn how to talk about what you need fairly, and you need to be able to talk about what you need while touching each other, but not sexual touch. I'm talking about two people sitting on a couch facing each other and having your legs, one leg of each other's in between each other's, and then facing each other and having a proper conversation. So you're not brushing it off, or you're not just sweeping it under the carpet and hoping it will change and go away. Because if your relationship is built on what I call hinting and hoping, you'll end up wishing and waiting.
Hinting and hoping, or wishing and waiting. That's really, I like that.
Hinting and hoping turns into wishing and waiting. Yeah. And you'll wish and wait forever because you're waiting for someone to be different to what they are. And again, you're making them guess.
Yeah, and you're probably being polite.
You're making them guess what you want. We're all bloody polite.
It's kind of weird. It's kind of weird, isn't it? Like, can you imagine like going to a restaurant and sitting down at the table and then trying to make the waiter or service person try and guess what it is that you want off the menu? Like, it's actually kind of crazy. It's like, well, this isn't constructive or helpful or efficient or pleasurable for anybody.
No.
Why not just tell me what you want to order?
Yeah, imagine if you said to the waiter, "Oh, I'll just have whatever. Whatever you want, I'll have. Whatever's easy. Just give me whatever's easy." This is what we do in relationships every day. And this is what we do in the bedroom every day. If your partner says to you, "Do whatever you want," it's highly likely in their head they're saying, "Are you done yet?" Because they never ask for anything. And it's not fair on the person who's wanting to please you because they're guessing.
Yeah.
So what are some of the changes that you see in couples if they do actually start listening to their own needs and start leading, I guess, with what they want as opposed to trying to guess what their partner wants?
There's a game called the 3-minute game. And it is a game to determine who is touching who and for whose pleasure. So it only goes for 3 minutes. And there are 2 questions. How do you want to touch me for 3 minutes? And you can just use your arms up to your shoulders and just to your fingertips. So the first question is, how do you want to touch me for 3 minutes? And how do I want you to touch me for 3 minutes? So that you're able to determine the different types of touch.
Those are really quite powerful questions. And I suspect there would be a lot of people in relationships who might have been in those relationships for quite a long time, who have never actually asked their partner that directly or told their partner that directly how they do and don't like to be touched.
100%. So this is through my own experience. There is absolutely no research whatsoever done behind what I'm about to tell you. But from my own experience, when I became sexually active in my teen years, I was just happy to have a boyfriend. Like, I was like, oh my God, like, he likes me, he thinks I'm attractive. And so I didn't ask for what I wanted because it didn't enter my mind to want anything. I was just happy that he wanted me. That's like a bit of a biological makeup of how we are. However, when he hit maybe mid-20s, I think he became more sexually mature as a man, like as he aged as well. So then at 25, he knows he's having the best sex of his life because it's his. But he knows it could be better if I participated. So he wants the sex to go to the next level. So he looks at me and he says, "So what do you like?" And I go, "I like what you like." And I literally couldn't answer the question because I didn't know. And what I've learned through my amazing journey is, this is aimed towards women, we all have access to different flavors in our body, and we usually learn them through other women. I learned a lot more flavors through women than I ever have through men. And it just blew my mind.
I think like the sexual education that I experienced, I went through high school in the early 2000s. And I would say that has a lot to answer for in terms of no sexual education was about pleasure or enjoyment. It was really about instilling fear. It's scary, it's dangerous, there's lots of risk. And it was all very, if anything, like articulated around male pleasure and the male orgasm and ejaculation and, all of those kinds of things. So I think there is probably a gap that, it may be different now. Sex education as a teenager may be completely different now. But I know that my learnings, like that was all through conversations that were social or through my girlfriends and talking about their experiences and, much more a self-guided self-discovery. But I also grew up thinking that like female masturbation was really dirty and not a thing that girls do. So There is a really big disconnect of like, how do you figure out what you like if that's not even a conversation that's being had?
Well, I think how I did it through my teacher, we had to write a journal that lined up with our period, like our menstrual cycle. So what I had to do is write in a journal every day, what did my body feel like that particular day from an erotic or / sensual sexual sense. And I wrote that journal for 6 months, even though we only had to do it for a couple of months, but I kept at it because I was like, oh my God, this is fascinating. And I actually recognized my own patterns. So now I basically can ask for what I want. And if women were able to tune into their bodies and tune into their actual desires and had the skills to ask for that. And I want to make sure that people understand it is a skill. Like, it's really hard. It's not something that you can just expect somebody to do. But I teach people those skills so that they can create the deeper connection and understand the difference between giving and receiving, because you can only give what was asked for. If it wasn't asked for, you are not giving, you are receiving. So when women can actually learn to tune into their bodies and they learn the skill to ask for what they want, these things happen. She gets the sexual or sensual connection she desires, and he gets the spontaneity, and he never knows what's for dinner. So that creates the spontaneity that men love so much, plus the sexual satisfaction of actually satisfying their partner. And she gets what her body needs versus what he wants to give her.
Yeah.
Two totally different things.
This sounds like an incredible, like, inner work, date yourself kind of practice to get to know your own things. And I'm sure this is not just a single gender thing. I'm sure that this is something that anybody can do to really increase their own awareness about their own desires. If they were, being more observant of what it was that they, truly were craving from their core. So thank you for sharing that.
What does your body need there? That's the difference, is a need.
So are there any recommendations for some foundational skills that young couples could really embrace?
Learn to move the goalposts. So don't put your relationship into cruise control. Set a date, have a chat, and move the goalpost, or else you're just going along for things. That way you can make a conscious decision about your relationship and about your needs, and you're not living that, oh, we'll be fine, everything will work out, because guess what? That means you're hinting and hoping and wishing and waiting. If you're relying on the wishing and waiting, it's a recipe for disaster. Make a date with each other to sit down and move the goalpost.
I really love that you shared that, because that's something that Nath and I implemented probably a few years ago now, where we get together. We do it basically in line with the change of season.
3 months.
Where we sit down. Yeah, where we sit down and have a chat about, like, how did the last kind of 90 days go? What do we want for the next 90 days? How does that fit into our bigger vision and, our plans for our relationship and our lives? And, people go, oh, isn't that a bit clinical or a bit boardroom? And I just think, no, this is our lives. Like, important. What is more important than this? Than our core relationship? Like, but yeah, it's so interesting that you bring that up, because I was having a conversation with a friend today who's actually been on the show. So shout out to Ryan and Kaylee Bowles. But Nathan and I just celebrated our 8th wedding anniversary. They were like, oh, that's so great, guys. Congratulations. And I was like, yeah. And it just keeps getting better because we've chosen to choose it rather than coast. Yeah. And it was such a nice moment to reflect on that. It's like, yeah, we do choose this better on year on year on year rather than just letting it coast. But I've never heard it described as moving the goalposts. I like that. Like, yeah, stretch. What else could we achieve?
And you can't assume that people don't change. Life is there to be lived. So just because, I know what his favorite sandwich is, well, crikey, that might change. Don't assume that he's going to be his favorite sandwich forever. And we kind of get into these patterns of thinking we know a person. And when you think you know a person, it means you're not going to be able to grow and change and move the goalposts and support each other, because you're being treated like, I know what they like. Not sure about that.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, though, because even with that little 3-month check-ins, it is a really great opportunity to review that last 90 days. And there might have been something which we really enjoyed through that last couple of months that we might not have actually articulated at the time either.
Sure.
And it's like, oh, actually, I remember that time back then that I really enjoyed doing that. And I think it's a great opportunity to kind of check back in and kind of pick up any of the balls you might have dropped along the way or
the ones that you're loving dribbling.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's I would recommend that people make sure your bodies are connected when you're having those conversations, even if your legs are just touching each other on the couch. Not sexual touch, just make sure your bodies are somehow connected with each other. It just opens the heart when you're speaking.
Mm.
Yeah. One of my love languages is physical touch, so that's always something that we're doing anyway.
Yeah.
So, Wala, thank you so much for joining us. Before we kind of wrap up, I would love to know, is there a daily or weekly practice that you would recommend, either for couples or individuals, for them to strengthen that, dating yourself or dating your partner forever?
Yeah. So the two that I would do is hip movements for the ladies. I don't care if you are washing the dishes or on the phone or in the shower. Just move your hips from side to side, and it only has to be like an inch. It doesn't have to be stripper moves or, these round big things, but just move your hips from side to side, because we're not designed to sit in chairs as much as we do. And if you have an opportunity to move your hips, it just warms the engine. And the other side of that is the starting sentences with do you, and just notice when you're gift wrapping an I want with a do you want, and just notice how cleanly and clearly you speak to each other, because it is a skill. So if you just notice when you do it, you don't have to tell yourself off. Just notice it. Notice how many times you start a sentence with do you want.
Yeah, I think there's some really great tips that are super easy to implement as well, and all of us can be doing each day.
Yeah, just notice it. All you have to do is notice it.
Thanks for joining us, Wala.
Pleasure.
As you may know, at Fuel Collective, we have 3 pretty special values which we live by, and that is to date forever, which we've chatted about heaps today, to love life, and then to be the change. So being the change is really about making the changes that we can in our own life, little small things, but then also making a bigger impact in the world. So to say thank you for joining us, we've provided 100 days of clean water to a student in Zambia. So this helps vulnerable children at a school, bringing clean water and good sanitation practices, as well as benefiting the wider community. So thank you very much for that.
Awesome. Thank you.
And Wala, if people have loved what you've been sharing, or, maybe want to do a session with you, or want to, unpack this a little further, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
So my name is spelt WALA. So it's walatruscott.com.au.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think there were so many great practical and tactical tips in there for everybody. And I look forward to seeing how people evolve their relationships being sexy rather than polite.
And a little hip movement.
And a little bit of hip movement, and start saying I want and I need and will you and may I. Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Wala.
Thanks heaps for joining us. If you love what we're doing here and want more, subscribe to the Date Forever podcast to make sure you never miss an ep. Come and hang out with us and other awesome couples who are fueling up their relationships in the Thriving Couples Collective Facebook group, or check us out at fuelcollective.com.au. Until next time, keep on dating, because better relationships equal a better world.